Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Alice Irene Whitaker, the Director of Communications here at Smart Prosperity Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to Transitioning to a Circular Economy, Learning from the Quebec Experience. It should be a very rich and interesting conversation. I'm struck by how we have people here today on our panel and moderator who have expertise in regional, provincial, and national circular economy building, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation with them today. We'll be exploring a report that Québec Circulaire and Smart Prosperity published last month on this topic, and we encourage you to check it out. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on today. While we meet today virtually, I would like to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment to and responsibility for improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present, and to consider how we can each try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation. I have a couple of housekeeping items that I'll go into before turning it over to our moderator for today. For questions, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Because we have over 300 people joining us today, we won't be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll do our best, and I'll select as many questions as possible to direct to our panelists for the conversation. This event is being recorded and will be shared on Smart Prosperity Institute's YouTube channel, and we'll make it available after the event. And finally, I'm excited to share that we are currently seeking examples of innovative solutions leading the transition to a more circular, sustainable, and resilient food system across Canada. There is particular interest in finding Indigenous, coastal, and rural solutions. This research is funded by the National Zero Waste Council, the City of Guelph's Our Food Future, and NGen Canada's Advanced Manufacturing Supercluster, and the research is conducted by Smart Prosperity Institute. The examples that we find will inform the Circular Economy Solution Series Circular Food Systems track later in the year in partnership with Circular Economy Leadership Canada. So we encourage you to please share this. The link should be in the chat. You can share it with your colleagues, friends, and community members who are building a more circular and resilient food system in our country. It's my great pleasure to now introduce you to our moderator for today's discussion, Barbara Schwartz. Barbara has more than 30 years of experience working in the public sector, and she is currently the Executive Director of Strategy, Innovation, and Intergovernmental Relations at the City of Guelph. Among the many projects she is leading is the Smart Cities Canada initiative, which is creating Canada's first circular food economy. We're honored to have you here, Barb. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this important event. It's really a wonderful opportunity to learn from the Quebec experience, which is really forging the path in Canada for the transition to the circular economy. We often talk about the importance of transitioning from a linear to a circular economy. And one of my international colleagues made a bold statement the other day. And that statement was that the linear economy is dead. It's dead. That's an important frame change for me. If you look around, you do see that we are certainly in the final death throes of an old system. You see the impact of climate change, social inequality, decreasing biodiversity, and many more things. But you also see many important points of light that are emerging to illuminate the path to a new economic system, a new sense of inclusive and resilient communities that live within planetary boundaries. And the framework of the circular economy is one that helps us to think about organizing our economic relationships in a way that's inspired by nature's circular systems. In nature, there's no such thing as waste, because everything has inherent value and a role to play in a very interconnected system that's constantly nourishing and replenishing and regenerating itself, ultimately in support of all life on our planet. So while we may all be working at smaller scales across the country, At some point, that's probably the only scale that's going to have the power and ability to take root and to grow. And I really think the transformation to a circular and sustainable system is going to come from the work in communities, like the work that is happening across Quebec. So it's wonderful to have the Quebec experience translated for the first time to be able to share with the rest of Canada. And the key learnings really serve as guideposts for others to follow. I commend to all of you the report. It's going to be required reading for our team. And the key learnings lay out the role of the academy and actors across the province, the co-creation of a shared vision, governance and collaboration model, and many innovative tools and approaches that you'll hear about today. So now I want to introduce our panelists who will be sharing and reflecting on the Quebec experience and the report itself. Stephanie Jagu is a consultant at Circularity. She has more than 20 years of experience in management, sustainable development, corporate social responsibility, and has headed up a number of projects in Canada and Europe, as well as in Haiti, Costa Rica, and New Zealand. She has honed her skills in a variety of organizations, from NGOs to small businesses to multinationals. She has served as Group Director of Sustainable Development and Quality, as well as founded her own consultancy agency in France. In recent years, she has developed and delivered courses in sustainable development and the circular economy for professional and academic audiences. In particular, she spearheaded the development of the massive open online course on circular economy developed in Quebec. She holds a master's degree in international commerce and an honors degree in European business and a DES in environmental management from Quebec. Stephanie Cairns is director of the circular economy with Smart Prosperity Institute. Stephanie leads SPI research programs on sectoral circular economy strategies, including projects on implications for primary material producers, circular economy considerations in transition to low carbon technologies, and circular economy approaches for zero plastic waste, and in the ag and agri-food sector. She has edited the 7-part Circular Economy Global Sector Best Practices series and co-authored many reports for the Smart Prosperity Institute, including Innovations for a Circular Economy, Learning from the Clean Growth Journey. Stephanie serves on the expert panel on the circular economy of the Canadian Council of Academies. So at today's event, we are first going to hear from Stephanie Jagu. Because we have two Stephanies, I'm going to refer to Stephanie J and Stephanie C with their permission. Stephanie J will explore the report, transitioning to a circular economy, and how other jurisdictions can apply lessons learned from Quebec's experience. Following that, Stephanie C will provide us with a few minutes of reflection and then we'll engage in a conversation. So if you have some questions, please put them in the question box and we will certainly get to them after the presentations. Stephanie J, over to you.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you for SPI for inviting me over today to present this report. I've had great pleasure researching it and writing it and now sharing it with everyone. And I have sheer and strong hopes that it will bring some key learnings and some examples that could be, some things that other institutions and anywhere else in Canada be able to learn from it and maybe piggyback on it, if you excuse the expression. Before I start, I would like to say, as a word of putting everything in context, this report is about what happened between 2014 and 2020. And I would like you to place yourself in a situation whereby back in 2015, North America was largely yet to discover the model of circular economy, not even mentioning how to define it or to apply it. So it was a developing concept that was only known maybe in a limited number of countries like Germany, Netherlands, China, or Japan. So what has been done in Quebec has to be placed in that context of really the novelty and the innovation that is linked to putting it into practice in the province. I think what the report brings also is not only how it has been done, how we started a transition in Quebec towards a circular economy, but also it brings about some a portrait, I guess, of key elements of the circular economy, key actors in the province, and how they could go about implementing a circular economy. If you want to go on to the next slide, please. So having said that, it was very new. It was a very new concept. However, if we look at it back in 2020 already, we can tell just by those numbers that a lot has been accomplished. So in a 5-year time, with a concept and tools and structures that were yet to be developed, we still managed to reach really good results. So I have high hopes that in the rest of the provinces, things and results can be achieved also very quickly and at a high level. Here, what I wanted to say is that, we have 142 initiatives in Quebec featured. Not everybody is featured on the website, but it's the increase in itself is what is important. What's interesting too is knowing that circular economy, and that's one learning also in Quebec, but that's also linked very much to how Quebec is structured, is that there's a lot of small and medium enterprises and organizations in Quebec. And so they are the ones who have been leading a good majority of the initiatives. And the other one are the non-for-profit organizations. There are definitely organizations that have been out there that have been putting forward the principles, the approaches, and the strategies of a circular economy. I also wanted to mention that we have, the massive online course in itself has brought Quebec knowledge to the international forefront, because we have over 60 countries represented in our students. So we managed to have international recognitions with educational tools is one other things that I wanted to convey. And one other numbers that I wanted to put forward, because I believe it is a strong number in itself, is industrial synergies, for example, have been something to be very proud of in Quebec, with a number of strategies and symbioses that have been put together, and the number of material fillers identified illustrate, I believe, the strong work that has been done there. Would you like to go further, Marion, please? Next slide. Marion, next slide, please. Thank you. So before I go into the details of this, what I wanted to mention is maybe some keywords. Remember, everything had to be learned, created, developed, and tested. But together we're stronger. So one key aspect was really to collaborate. So the key words really behind this initiatives in Quebec is collaboration, cross-pollination at different scales. It's also, I think, one of the key elements was creativity and open innovations. This was really key in order to learn from best practices, learn from each other, and go together quicker for the transition at different scales, whether it was for cities, boroughs, or regions. And maybe one last thing that I'd like to say is that transitioning to more resilient societies is complex. And it actually requires a systemic approach, and interconnectivity is absolutely key. So maybe one keyword would be meshing or knitting, if you would like, to make sure that the actors at different levels in an interdisciplinary manner actually connect. But beyond all of this, I think there are at least two key aspects that I would like to mention. One is three aspects. One is change management. Transitioning to the circular economy means transitioning to different ways of doing things. It's kind of an internal revolution. It's kind of a society revolution, right? So it is a change management, and change management is lengthy. It means long-term engagement. So long-term engagement is also one of the key aspects to putting it together in the province of Quebec. And because efforts and change and initiatives, they don't spring up like this. There are humans at the heart of it, right? And humans are the ones that makes the difference. And passion and dedication of individuals and organizations is definitely been a key driving force. So I just wanted to bring those aspects before I go into more of the specific aspects of the report itself. Deeply rooting a transition towards a sustainable and more resilient society, I believe, is extremely important, and what the pandemic, out of the rather sad happenings of the last year, has taught us is organizations that were already engaged into a circular economy approach have proven to be more resilient. They have proven to be more agile. They have been proven to actually bring bring to themselves more opportunities, react, and help the rest of the society. So I believe, however, the pandemic and the situation has had a lot of hardships. It has also constituted or represented, opportunities for circular economy to go further, and proves that it is a useful and a necessary element of a transition to a more resilient society. So to go more into how it started with a university. It started with a vision. A university, basically the campus of University of Montreal is composed of 3 universities: Université de Montréal, Polytechnique Montréal, et HEC Montréal. They, back in much before 2014, because I believe it took about 5 years to set up the institute in 2014, there was a long reflection as to how do we put our efforts together, make them converge towards sustainable development. So the idea of an institute was existing. It was supposedly oriented only towards sustainable development, but never doubt the power of one. It took one person to actually say, circular economy is important. I think it should be on the agenda. And that person is not only knowledgeable and curious and brings ideas, but also is a very good motivator, and he's also a very good negotiator, I'd say. So he brought the subject to the institute, and it becomes the Institute EDEC that included not only sustainability, but also a specific aspect of circular economy. So one learning is, if you do something, if you spearhead an initiative from the academic background, it has its pros, it has its cons, but bear in mind, it is a lengthy process. So that's one of the learning. The other learning with that is the key, and really a key aspect of that was that how academies and universities are perceived is they are neutral in positioning. They're apolitical, they're neutral, and they bring vision, they bring solid data with research. And that was a key aspect to actually start an initiative that people could not really go against because it was research backed. That's an extremely important part. The other aspect was that interdisciplinarity was extremely important, but it needed to have a research program. So one aspect behind it is to make sure that you have, one learning was dealing with researchers, you have to bring them added value to keep them motivated and carry on with you. Added value is having a research program that is co-designed with them, that brings all possibilities of learning for other disciplines, and also that eventually brings in financing, because researchers and professors have some limits, which are the use of their time. They need to do something that actually is either research, and for that they need financing, or they need to publish papers, right? So to keep them motivated, you have to bring them added value. And we'll go into that into a moment, but one aspect of that was to create a collective book with them. Long-term engagement of institution is also key, and that implies also long-term financing. So mobilization, one of the key learning is mobilization, bring added value to the researchers, make sure to always have activities that they can bring themselves their knowledge or get something out of it for themselves. And the collective book was good. Overall, 2,000 people were mobilized on campus, and about 80 research projects were started on the course of the 5 years. So I think the mobilization here has been very, very important. Now, when you have the research, you have defined what circular economy is about, what it can be dealing with in terms of, I don't know, philosophy, social information, in terms of marketing, in terms of economics, in terms of legal aspects, you know, in terms of even logistical solutions or technical solutions. When all of that is covered, you have a pretty good defined research object. That's the first thing. But you don't want it to stay at the university, and you don't want it to stay in a book somewhere, you know, in a library. What you want to do is making sure you transition the society. So what was super important is bridging the academic vision and knowledge with the society and the practitioners at different levels. And this is really, I think, the main key aspect of Quebec, is making sure that research and practitioners were together working hand in hand. Now, to actually get the practitioners, what was planned was to put together a roundtable, of multi-stakeholder roundtable. There were 15, now 20 different stakeholders from the society, whether we're talking governmental representative, we're talking non-for-profit organizations, we're talking academic, we're talking municipal level, we're talking organization representation of associations of all level businesses, financing organization. So all the levels and actors and practitioners in society were brought together in that multi-stakeholder roundtable. How? Again, it goes back to not only one individual this time, but two individuals. So the co-founders of the Institute were together bringing not only a very strong background of skills for motivation, because one, who is Melanie McDonald, has a background in psychosociology. So all of the motivational aspects of it, how do you engage with people and make them go together and work together, was there. But also, and this is what I mentioned here by address book, some people might know it by Rolodex, you need to get to the right people. This is where you get into the representative round table. Who do you put on that round table? Who are the influencers? Because these are the people you want. The influencers who are going to have power to make decisions and changes in their own sectors. So Daniel came with that address book. And so together, they really managed at the beginning of the Institute to bring forward the key people who worked on a voluntary basis and are still working on a voluntary basis, even if the EDEC Institute is now ended, its mandate is ended, and now it is continued with the CERIAC. So the motivation is there because it is a voluntary group. So what made it work? The safe space. The actual roundtable was moderated by the EDEC Institute, which brought the neutrality. So that was extremely important for all the participants to be willing to share information and, you know, pitfalls eventually, or best practices and key information. So that's what happened. But it's not only, you know, I'm obviously focused more on the EDEC Institute in that presentation, but as we said earlier on, this report is from the EDEC Institute point of view, but a lot more initiatives have been done in Quebec. I can't really go into details in them now, but there are more details in the report itself. Now, once you have your research and your practitioners who are ready to test things in their organization, their own market, their own value chain, their own local region, well, you still need to prove what circular economy is about. What can it bring? What are the benefits? What are the pitfalls? What are the threats? What are the opportunities, the barriers, the levers? And so this was the third step. It really needed to be based on fact. So again, research played a super important role, if I may say. And it was about making the economic rationale visible. So the report pinpoints, a number of initiatives that have been put forward. But, you know, business leaders, as well as organizations of any kind, what they want is proof of return of investment before they actually make any modification in their business plan, in their way of doing things. Thank you, Marion, for the warning. So research and learning from this, we learned like extremely important aspect for example, what is the circularity of the textile industry? 6%. You know, which you can look at it as, wow, this is very low, or, oh my God, what a world of opportunities out there, you know. So it depends, but if you don't have the picture, you can't act upon it. So you need to have research to be able to know, okay, how are we doing? And I have to say, the government in that aspect has been extremely proactive, because back in 2016, they actually funded a 3-year research on 3 specific metals in Quebec, because they were visionary enough to know that scarcity of resources was going to hit them quicker than maybe other industries, right? It is extremely important for them. But they were visionary enough to actually mandate for a research report specifically on circular economy and those metals. We have a number of other things that can go in that, but the fourth step, I guess, is you have all of that knowledge. Now, what you want to do is you have your researchers, you have your practitioners that are already mobilized, you have your data. Well, you want people to know about it. So you have to communicate about it, you know. So there were a number of strategies for that. But the most important aspect was to create a common understanding. And that was by creating first a common definition, making everybody agree on what the circular economy was, and also a visual representation that has been extremely useful also for understanding the hierarchy and the logic behind the 12 strategies of circular economy. So that was a key, really a key stepping stone for starting promoting circular economy in Quebec. And it has been done by obviously either strategic or sector specific strategy focus, because, well, Recycle Quebec, for example, by the nature of its mission, is obviously going to go on specific strategies. AAQ is going to go, for example, on eco-design, because this is what they do, and they are going to focus on it for their members. But what was important aside from that, and I think was a basis for all of the communication, is testimonies, facts, and events, and webinars, and how would I say, seducing the media. You want the media to talk about it. You want it to be in different outlets in terms of media. The Radio Canada or Radio Canada, sorry, kind of a great outreach of everybody, or the very specific aspect. So we had some documentaries that are been made, for example. And the other aspects that I think has been a very key in Quebec was convening. And by convening, I mean the creation of les assises de l'économie circulaire, which is the yearly, well, it has been less than yearly because of the pandemic, but it started again this year. The Assises de l'économie circulaire was an incredible and is an incredible opportunity to gather everybody together and create networking opportunities, you know, cross-learning, cross-pollination of information and everything. So that was absolutely key. Once you're communicated, what goes hand in hand with this and throughout the whole process, because it's not necessarily a one after one process, a linear process, it's really more of a parallel happening, is educate. Educate next generations, educate people now. So there are 2 levels of education that are extremely important: the university-based level and the practitioners level. So we're starting to see educational aspects with some entities creating their own training, for example, on eco-design and everything. But we are also seeing more universities. The way it worked is it started by 1 course on circular economy in a sustainable development course. And now we have dedicated university courses for circular economy, or even programs and masters and certificates. I have 2 minutes remaining. Thank you very much for this. So the key points I'd like to say just about educational strategies you want things to be practical. You want people to not work on case studies that date 10 years back. You want them to work on something that is here and now, and that's going to be useful now. And the other thing is that you want to fund students. You want to give them scholarships. You want to help them research. You want to help them go further. So this is the other aspect of it. And very quickly, if you want to move to next slide, and I promise I'll finish in time. So it all sounds good, and it all sounds like it has been all planned out. It certainly wasn't. Some of it has been planned, and a lot of it is initiatives that have sprung and actually did mesh properly with the other, or the idea of meshing them together was there. So it worked together to become a system. And I would even say an ecosystem of circular economy in Quebec. But the recent circularity report shows that the circularity index in Quebec is only 3.5%. So the road is long for us to get to a high level of circularity. And what is really important is continued collaboration among actors, open innovation for sure, and develop a roadmap. It has been discussed before, but it really is the next steps that is necessary there. And we have to go beyond minimizing the bad of linear economies. As Barbara said, linear economy is dead. So we need to take that into consideration and move forward and create together what's coming up next. So if you'd like, I can tell you further a bit more details about what was the government implication and responsibilities in it all, but I'll end it here. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. There's so much to dig into there. So I'm encouraging people to put their questions in the chat, and we will come to them after a response and a reflection by Stephanie Cairns. Over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Barb, and thank you for that delightful presentation, Stephanie J. When I reflect from, working outside of Quebec largely, when I reflect on what has been so distinctive about the Quebec experience, three features really jump out. First, the focus from the very outset on collaboration and recognition that systemic change of the type that's called for by the circular economy requires the deep engagement of a broad, multi-stakeholder and collaborative community of practice and a bottom-up approach for learning by doing and generative knowledge co-construction. So a very open approach to how an agenda is going to emerge. Second, the commitment to a multifaceted program of work, one that has recognized the distinctive but complementary roles for interdisciplinary academic research, sector analysis, strategic communication strategies, pilot projects, technology transfer, information platforms, yearly summits, post-secondary education and non-academic training, et cetera, et cetera. Third, the importance of a systems approach. Plus, I think what is very interesting is a willingness to go deeper into the circular economy model to explore some of the less widespread and potentially more disruptive strategies, such as a need to reduce consumption, reuse and repair strategies, product as a service, and the potential of the sharing economy. And it's very interesting in that regard to see the leadership of the social economy sector as a key agent in some of these less widespread strategies. And the report itself includes an absolutely lovely case study of Montreal-based Intertech, which was originally founded as a social enterprise to promote youth integration into the job market, and now provides IT repair and services through a circular economy model. So looking at the Quebec experience, we need to be clear that the so-called rest of Canada in 2021 is a very different place than Quebec in 2015. Over the last few years, there have been a number of impressive and important initiatives starting to flower. To name a few, local innovation accelerators such as Project Zero in Victoria and Impact Zero in Toronto, sector-specific regional initiatives such as Guelph's Our Food Future or Metal Tech Alley in BC, some national efforts such as Love Food, Hate Waste, the Circular Innovation Council, the Canada Plastics Pact, or the Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, which is now being led by the National Zero Waste Council and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We have the first stages of convening sector-specific national conversations through the Circular Solutions Series hosted by Circular Economy Leadership Canada and the Globe Series. And most recently, the exciting announcement of an Ideas Lab on the circular economy by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So stuff is happening, but these groups have been largely working in isolation and sometimes, unfortunately, even in competition with each other. What we're really missing is an explicit national community of practice with resources to share best practices, to create new knowledge, to support peer-to-peer learning, and to tackle common needs together. Common needs such as data or material marketplaces or addressing major research questions. And without this community of practice model, it's going to be very hard to accelerate and to scale the great efforts that have begun. And as well, we are really missing a coordinated and collective strategy. And without this, we can't send a strong signal to industry, to investors, and to the innovation community. This is changing, however, an exciting development over literally just the last few months, led by the chair of our session today, led by Barb, is that over a dozen Canadian organizations working on circular economy have come together in a group effort to map out the elements for a collaborative national circular economy innovation system and to work together to seek the investments that are needed. And that model has many elements in common with what we have just heard about Quebec's experience. So Stephanie Jagu did an amazing job of summarizing the main messages from the report that we have released, but there's a lot more content there and interesting case studies, much more detail on all the specific practices. And I think we can all learn a lot from going over those lessons learned and the experience from Quebec. Thanks, Barb.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I have a couple of questions, and I know there's some questions popping up in the Q&A box, which I will get to in a moment. I think one of the really interesting things that is helping move things forward is the creation of reports like this from Quebec. And, certainly our project and others are now thinking about how do you create a report that distills your experience and, is an artifact and a pathway that'll help others to follow. So I'd love to hear, how did this report come about, and what was the impetus for it? Because I think there's some interesting lessons there as well. Stephanie, do you want to start us off on that? Stephanie C.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in, and in many ways, it's a very Canadian story. It started with a conversation I had with Danielle Normandin, the founding executive director of the ADEC Institute. And there was a Canadian delegation attending the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki. This was in June 2019, so 2 years ago. And we are just being wowed by learning how the Finns and how the Europeans more broadly are implementing circular economy. But there was a reception for Canadian delegates, and Danielle started sharing a lot more about what was underway in Quebec, which was just as impressive as those European initiatives. But none of us from the rest of Canada knew much about it due to the language barrier. So very Canadian, right? Mm-hmm. So we agreed to find a way to summarize and translate that experience into English so that this knowledge would be more accessible to the rest of Canada. And fast forward, and between Québec Circulaire and Smart Prosperity Institute, we're able to secure funds from the Quebec government's Canadian Relations Support Program and a SHIRC Connections grant to research and write the report, which has been a major project led by Stephanie Jagu. So here we are. Of course, given the extent of initiatives which have taken in place in Quebec since 2014, the report doesn't claim to provide an exhaustive review. It is particularly linked to the experience of the ADEC Institute, and it's focused on trying to feature the key elements that have contributed to this transition to a circular economy in the province.
That's terrific. Thank you. I want to get to a question that is about, it's a two-parter. So it's about the idea that Quebec has really seemed to succeed in helping move circular economy strategies sort of up the ladder, building on recycling and efficiency measures, but further up the ladder in terms of active considerations of strategies like eco-design, reduce, reuse, repair, and sharing. How do you think that happened? And Like, what are the strategies that were used in order to do that? And then the second part is, and how receptive were businesses? And if you have any concrete examples, there's a couple of questions that are about, do you have a specific example of a success that you might share? So Stephanie J, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yes. So I think really the first idea behind moving the discussion to circular economy was communicating about it, educating and communicating about it, because otherwise circular economy is about recycling, definitely, and people, like even France had struggle with that for a while, I think, and is still struggling some with that, is to move away from circular economy is recycling, and that has been done really. I mean, we discussed this with Danielle, and the basic thing is the visual representation of what circular economy is about, helped people visualize where recycling is. And because it is on a life cycle analysis kind of hierarchy and logic, people make it much more, they understand much more, so recycling is end of line, really. What I should be looking into is maybe more of those, early on strategies eventually. So there are those different aspects. And so it actually opened up how people were thinking about it. And one example is Recyc Québec. Recyc Québec, by the name of the organization, you will notice, is about recycling, right? But now they're looking at a number of different strategies and different approaches. So they themselves, within their own mission, have included different strategies and approaches of circular economy because recycling was not sufficient. So this is, I think, one big example of how this changed, because Recyc Québec is also a funding agency in Quebec. So if them as an agency understand that it's not only about recycling, but also about eco-design, also about reuse, then they will be doing call for projects in those approaches. They will be funding those. So they are a trigger to make sure that others get interested in those approaches too. So that could be one example that I could give you. Smaller examples, I guess, is there has been CTTI, which is also academic based, right? CEGEP, which is very Quebec specific based, but they dived into symbiosis, and they also used their activities and actions and illustrated them with guides, with a tour of the province, with educational aspect, a guide that has been freely available. So people who want to actually set up a symbiosis know how to. So tooling, communicating, training throughout the province, going local, not only being centralized in Montreal, but going in the regions to meet with the people and adapt to their specific needs was definitely what helped them also illustrate and find other strategies.
That's great.
Barbara, also add that the not-for-profit sector and social enterprise has been very important in keeping that part of the agenda at the forefront. To a certain extent, not-for-profits like Equiterre have, been more willing to engage in those and to promote those difficult conversations about, do we need to reduce consumption, for example. But also social enterprises have found that, some of the strategies tailor very well with the need for local employment, retraining for difficult to employ populations, kind of more the economic inclusion agenda. And by giving them space to explore that within, what otherwise might be more of a business-led conversation, there's been more ability for that side of the agenda to stay on a level playing field.
Yes, that's so interesting. We're finding that in our project too. There's a big role that the social sector is playing, the social innovation sector and the social enterprise sector. There's a question in the chat that says, mustn't it start with design? And I think that's a very good question. So Stephanie J, you want to start on that one?
I absolutely think that design, and this is also why it is one of the first, strategies, is design is key, because with design, you address a number of issues at once. and you also enable a number of strategies at once, because if you do some eco-design and you implement modularity, therefore you actually help and feed in repairability, maintenance. You also help and feed in recyclability. You help and feed in, you know, sharing of some material. And by that I mean, if you eco-design a building, you know, right now there is that question about schools that are closed on weekends or on holidays, but they have those huge kitchens that are not used, or they're huge, like whatever, leisure park or something. And so if you eco-design, you think about things, there might be legal issues, obviously, and regulations and others, but eco-design, I think, is definitely key in promoting some of the other end of line and helping some of the other end of line strategies to actually be efficient and performant. Performance is not very English, I'm sorry, but performing is what I meant.
That's wonderful.
I is doing a great job at it in Quebec at the moment.
Sorry, I missed that. Who?
Q, which is a Quebec organization, is doing an absolutely great job at it at the moment, and they're developing a hub especially for this tools. They're illustrating with a number of cases, so there's a lot that can be gathered from them.
Maybe somebody could put the link to that in the chat. That sounds really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the idea that the strategy needs to be somewhat emergent. So it's not like you started with a strategic plan or a framework and you said this is where we're going. It sounds to me like you really looked at where were the where was the energy popping up, and then how do you put the pieces of all of that together? Does the report actually frame up all of the work that was done? Like, how is there a point in time where you had this framework, or was it emergent? Like, was it something that unfurled over time?
Both. There definitely was a plan. There definitely were an agenda, a research program, and then an agenda with the roundtable, multi-stakeholder roundtable, and with its different committees that then were created, and each have I guess, added to the agenda by going deeper into some aspects. But it also was very much initiative-based, very organic in itself, right? So, and that's one word to be said about the potential of entrepreneurship as a general thing for circular economy, is because opportunities are there and people can take those and be creative, and because of the open innovation, then things go further with many more people, and we learn, you know, about the lessons, and we can readjust, and this is, I think, a definitely great factor of success.
That's wonderful. There's a question about, are there examples of how this approach has generated investments? And I think there are a couple of, certainly some significant investments from government, but I'm thinking about industries as well. Can you respond to that, Stephanie J?
Yeah, so there's currently an investment fund that has been created a few months ago by Fondation with a total of 33 million. So I guess that gives an idea of how interesting that is. There's also another investment that has been done by the FRQ for the creation of FRQNT, SC, sorry, for the creation of a research network on actual circular economy in itself. So that's another investment, but more on the practical side for, I guess, companies and organizations. Recyc Québec does call for projects very often on either strategies or specific aspect of circular economy. So there is funding through Recyc Québec that is happening very regularly. And so, but I'll be honest with you, there is, although we can see there is a rise in interest. For example, there was a training session at the request of the government of Quebec with 140 participants from various ministries back in December presenting the circular economy. So we see it as a stepping stone. But still, the government is missing a roadmap and a framework to actually impulse, I guess, more financing and therefore more programs in a more strategic manner and a more oriented manner, right? So there is still, as I mentioned, a road ahead, but definitely thanks or because of the pandemic, things are moving. There's a lot more investment and more money that is being proposed right now to go further. So I think it's definitely positive in that sense.
Stephanie C., just building on that, the question of who initiates or who leads these things. We often think a level of government should do that. In this case, it was the academy, but what are you seeing across Canada in terms of leadership and initiation of circular economy projects?
Interesting question, Barb. I think we're seeing, what we're seeing is less kind of, oh, it has to be this sector or that sector, and more around the type of role that they need to bring forward. So I think that the academic initiative out of Quebec is completely unique in Canada. There's no other academic institute that's working anywhere near that scale of ambition and influence. In other sectors, we're seeing local governments, so municipal governments certainly picking up the baton on this, sometimes from an innovation perspective and supporting, say, local accelerator businesses, sometimes supporting just those communities of practice I talked about before, trying to bring together people who have an interest in this. And we also have some nonprofits who are leading on it. Obviously, there is also quite a bit that's happening less visible to the public eye, perhaps, but in the business sector, and particularly motivated around some of the hot point topics such as plastics or such as food loss and waste. That's a bit less visible. But I think that the key to the model in Quebec has been this collaborative, neutral, kind of flexible platform that's been willing to evolve as the stakeholders kind of said it needed to go in a certain direction. And that could be provided by lots of different types of organizations, as long as there's that deep commitment to that more facilitative model.
That's wonderful. I'm just checking. I think we have time for one more question from the chat. Stephanie J., are there some specific innovative processes or technologies emerging from this work that you would want to point to? People were also asking about examples of tools that were used.
So, all right, the second part about the tools, there are two places where you can find tools. So the definition of tools is rather liberal in some of them, but the Fonds Éco-Leader in itself provides a number of support methods or actual tools, or they actually present also what type of trainings are available. So it's a rather liberal way. On Quebec Circular platform itself, there was a number, if I remember well, over 150 tools that were developed worldwide that have been subject to review by a panel in Quebec to see how those could be eventually adapted or pertinent even for deployment in Quebec. And those are available on the website of Québec Circulaire. So they range from how to eventually address a business change model to more how to communicate about things. So there are different types of tools, and I would be a bit too lengthy here to define them all, but they are to be found on quebeccirculaire.org. In terms of specific technology, I know of a number in particular for recycling. And I know there are a number of research projects for, well, that are linked to climate change, right? So there are linked, for example, to capture of CO2, which also links to the food chain in some extent with the agriculture, because it is with the management of manure and some of things, right? I wouldn't be able to give exact names of organization right now, but I would be glad to provide them or direct you to the right person, whoever asked the question. So if you'd like to contact me, or for any of the other questions that I see popping that we won't have time to get to.
Terrific. Thank you. That's a lovely way to end. And it's always a pleasure to participate in these panels. I learned so much. It's wonderful to meet the people behind these projects and have a contact going forward and a face to put behind it. I'm going to turn it over to our host, Alice Irene, for closing.
Thank you very much, Barb. Thank you for guiding our conversation today. And to Stephanie Jagu and to our discussant, Stephanie Cairns, thank you for sharing your insights with us all. There were a number of thought-provoking questions that we didn't get to. Thank you for those. And for those of you that are interested, a number of them are answered in the report itself. So please do check out the report and you'll see the link in the chat box. We also at SPI have a global sector best practices series on goes into specific sectors going towards transitioning to a circular economy. So please do check those out. Thank you to the team that made today's event possible. Thank you to everyone for taking the time from your day to join us and engage in this conversation. It's timely. We heard that the linear economic system is dead. So let's think about what we can build anew and what we can create instead and moving forward. And many of the people here today are doing just that. So thank you for your incredible work in that. It's a great collective and community to be a part of across the country. If you have any feedback on today's event, please feel free to give us some feedback in a short survey so we can improve on future events. You can also check out Our Future, the Quebec Circular Platform, where you can sign up for SPI's newsletter for more information on these topics and new research that will be coming out all the time. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it and look forward to continuing this conversation on moving to a circular economy in Quebec and beyond to the rest of Canada. Thanks, everyone.